Yeah, hey coach, Jack Loader, House of Sparky. Obviously a late schedule release this year. Were there any surprises on the schedule? And did your preparation differ over the last month as opposed to a season where you know the schedule early on in the fall?
I mean, not really. I mean, the schedule is you're trying to certainly balance and a lot of factors. You're trying to balance when you put your schedule together, opponents away, all those things in preparation for postseason. You know, the obvious factor that's with this schedule that hasn't been in years gone by is the COVID thing. So our schedule has changed multiple times. Some things, and I would say some, most everything, and reasons being, factors being, is everything out of our control. So we're just happy at this point that we have a schedule. And I think if you follow the landscape of college athletics in general, I would anticipate that schedule changing even more as we go through the season because of certainly cases of COVID protocols, contact tracing, and things like that. So we like the schedule that we have. And, Ben, who was just on here, had the unenviable task of staying up with that, but we had multiple changes in a short amount of time, and we're still making adjustments to that. So relative to changing practices to fit your schedule, no. I mean, an opponent's an opponent. We respect everybody we play, so that really doesn't factor into our decision.
Metcalf?
Hi, Tracy. First off, I wanted to ask you about Pedro, just because, you know him from all kinds of realms in baseball. So if you could just talk about that a little bit, and then also if you wanted to make any comments on your contract extension.
Yeah, I mean, life's fun. I mean, life is precarious. I think we all know that, and I think life has a funny way of revealing how precarious it is. And I would say with COVID, and you ask about Pedro, and I'm tremendously sad. It's a devastating thing because not only have we lost in your industry someone who's paved the way for a lot of people probably that are on this particular Zoom. But I, believe it or not, I hadn't talked to Pedro. I shouldn't say I hadn't talked to him, we'd text, but I hadn't seen Pedro probably in 5 or 6 months. We were together at my house kind of when the onset of COVID hit, and then as most of us, lives kind of go a separate way, and it's just put a unique thing on social gatherings or interactions. But by chance, believe it or not, we practiced last Saturday, and my wife actually said, hey, I ran into Sandy, Pedro's wife, at a workout facility, and we're going to go, to their house on Saturday. And, I was coming back from practice, and I was like, okay, well, this is great. So long story short, my wife and I, and actually Sandy and Pedro, spent all last Saturday together, and just, when I say unbelievable how life comes at you, just talking about life, talking about work, talking about baseball, talking about family, and talking about his cooking. And again, I just, less than 24 hours, after that, he's gone. And I am so thankful, while I am devastated, while I'm, tremendously upset at the loss of him, not, in your world certainly, but just from a friend, I am thankful that I had that opportunity. And I just can't help but keep saying how random that was, that we hadn't been together, and then actually, Saturday night and just spending all that time just talking about all those things. And I don't know, man, I don't know what it is, but I said, Jeremy's sitting off here, I said, I'm not a real affectionate guy, but I just remember when we were leaving, I hugged Sandy, and ended up, Pedro and I hugged, and I don't normally do that. And the fact that, we sit here today under the circumstances we're dealing, I'm so thankful that for whatever reason that we had that night, and that we shared that conversation, we shared all of that, because as we've learned, life is very precarious, and we should not take it for granted. So I'm sad that he's gone, but I'm so thankful that we got that last evening with with him and Sandy. So, your second question, what was it? Contract? Is that?
If you can comment on it, I don't know if you can, or you want to.
Well, I mean, I saw the news reports, so it's out there. I honestly don't know when the official approval is. You guys probably know that ahead of I. Those are things that have been worked out, and now it's just, just out of respect for, COVID and just in general, a lot of other things going on. It's not been something that, we've talked a lot about, but yeah, I mean, the administration's doing what they're doing on the contract side. I think there's another step, the Board of Regents or whatever they do to approve that. But we just felt it was in the best interest of our program. And, we've done, unfortunately we didn't get to see the fruits of the labor last season with the things that we've been building, that taken away, but we wanted to keep on that path because, as you know, recruiting is important. And I think it's important that people know that the staff or the people that are recruiting you, that are going to be there when you arrive on campus. So we're thankful for the opportunity to continue to do that. And that's about all I got for you on that.
Ethan Ryder.
Yeah, Coach Ethan Ryder, WCSN. I just want to ask, how have kind of preparations for this season been different than, years prior, talking about COVID and stuff, maybe how you're going about practices or any sort of team gatherings, just how those preparations have been different?
Yeah, it's interesting you threw in the team gathering, because that's really kind of what's been different is it's just that quality time that you get to spend with your team collectively that I think is a little bit missing. We're doing it right now. We're all on Zoom, but I think we would all agree that being on Zoom isn't the same as being in person. But in terms of like the everyday function of practice, that's been the same. It's just been probably more of the meeting times. It's been more of the individual off-field times of trying to get your team together, and some of that bonding stuff that I think is important, has always been important, but you just got to be creative. But that's been the biggest difference. But in terms of being able to do what we need to do from a baseball physical standpoint, we've been able to do what we needed to do.
Alex.
Hey, Coach. Now that we're just a little over a week away, other than Connor, where do you guys stand injury-wise? And also, do you guys have a rotation you feel like is getting close to being set?
So you never ask about injuries, because then a coach has to comment that we're doing in great shape, and then somebody goes out that day and gets injured, man. So I got to knock on wood the whole time we're talking. We feel like we're in pretty good shape on the injury front. I know you talked to Ben about the Connor Davis situation, but we feel like we're in pretty good shape. Injuries are something that everybody has to deal with. So, I don't want to say more than that because I don't want to jinx myself, but we're in pretty good shape going into the season. Got a few banged up, little tweaks here and there, but other than that, we feel like we're pretty good shape.
Michael Barabalt.
Hey, Coach. During the first week or so of the season, are there plans to try different lineup combinations or moving guys around the field defensively? And if so, who are those players that could play a utility role, not only early in the season, but throughout the course of the season?
Well, like every year, of the coaching career, I think, you're going to get what you earn, in this program. And up to this point, I would say we've, the practice has allowed us the ability to see, quote unquote, who's in the mix. And what I mean by that is like who's in the mix to get the opportunities, the game opportunities to go out and win and solidify a position. In my mind, I would say that we got a lot of new faces, a lot of new bodies out there. And really the only guy that has put in significant time at Arizona State and been a everyday guy would be, Drew Swift. And, I think Hunter Jump has certainly done it for the offense, but we're going to let that stuff play out over the first few weekends, as always, because it's one thing to do in practice, but it's another thing to do when the lights are on and during the game. So I always like to let that happen. Same thing on the mound. We got a lot of guys that are going to have a lot of innings early to solidify their role as, the starter, reliever, back end guy, whatever. And I think your question was like specific guys with that. I mean, honestly, the list is too big. When I say in the mix, outside, I know, here, let's put it like this. I know if I'm writing a lineup right now, I'm going to write shortstop, Drew Swift, and then, you know, there's going to be a bunch of guys vying for different positions. So I honestly, I don't really want to say that. We'd be on here for the next hour talking about everybody. So you're going to see probably a lot of different combinations because we're trying to learn what best ones work together. And as always, you try to have that stuff in order prior to the conference play starting.
Jacob Rudner.
Hey, Tracy, hope you've been well. When you've talked in the past about how this roster kind of sets up to be a little bit different in years past in terms of offensive strategy, and it's going to be a little more towards the small ball stuff than it has been in the past. Do you think that this team kind of still needs the run up to be able to get up to speed on that, or how have they responded to those changes and kind of that direction in your preparation for the season?
Well, again, I mean, it is going to be different. I think we had one of the best not only best offensive teams in the country last year, but probably one of the most power-oriented teams in the country. And as I say, we didn't get to really see it, but I think we know a pretty unique offensive team. This team's different. It's not saying that we don't have guys that have power, but I think for us to compete and succeed at the level that we want, we can't expect that we're going to have, 1 through 7 or 8 guys in a lineup that, they're going to be hitting a bunch of home runs. So guys have to understand their role. They have to understand what their particular job is, and it may be working a walk, getting on base. We're going to hit some home runs, but it's going to be, I think, the occasional power. So it's just been a more or less using the inner squads that we've been able to play to teach and reinforce of, understand what type of hitter you are. More importantly, understand what type of hitter we need you to be for us to be successful. And sometimes that's challenging because, these guys have watched and understand that over the last couple of years, we've been a very threatening team offensively with the long ball. So don't try to be that if that's not who you are. Be who we need you to be. But we've used the practices and the inner squads to kind of develop that identity of who we are. But truly, we're not going to know that until we start playing. That's we get to this point every year, and every year in my career, it's like you get to this time, you're like, we need to play somebody else because you see each other every day, same pitchers every day. You can either get a false sense of, hey, we're better than we, and then you find out you play somebody else, you're not as good as you thought, or you're like, gosh darn it, we don't do this real well, and then you get out and play against somebody, and you're a little bit better than you thought. So we just need to play somebody else to kind of figure that out. But we feel like we've got enough weapons to figure out a way to score runs. It may be different than what it was in the past, but we still think we're going to be okay.
Nicholas.
Hey, it's Nicholas Odell for Inferno Intel here. I wanted to know a little bit more about the morale and motivation of the players, especially the returners after having a year like last year cut short, and even the newcomers after for some of them having their entire seasons just completely canceled. What's that been like from your standpoint of getting to see them actually play on a field for the first time under this environment for a while?
Yeah, I think it's appreciation would be the word that I would use. The guys appreciate, I know we do as coaching staff, we appreciate being out there and being able to compete. The morale is high. And here's the deal, like you got to be willing, as we've seen with our football programs and basketball and other sports that are competing right now, you have to be willing to deal with the unexpected. And to me, the unexpected is, as we talked about a little bit earlier, about we got a schedule set, but that doesn't mean that's what the schedule's going to be. My anticipation is there's going to be, last minute cancellations and things, and you just got to be able to stay mentally strong and try to work through that. And we've talked about it as a group, the team that handles that stuff the best, the team that, understands things are going to happen. Don't make excuses. Just be ready for everything. the team that does that the best is going to be probably the teams that are playing the longest this year. But our guys are in good spirits, feeling really good and excited for the opportunity to finally get back out there and play with or without fans. They're just ready to compete against somebody else.
Zachary.
Hey, Coach, I'm curious to hear what you expect Kai Murphy, what his role will be this year, either as a pitcher or position player or even both, and then what you've seen, like what's impressed you this fall that you've seen either as a position player or as a pitcher.
Yeah, I mean, Kai is, certainly comes from a baseball family, great baseball mind. Truth be told, in fact, I just told Murph this the other day. I said, honestly, we probably thought we were getting more of a pitcher that was going to help us out of the bullpen a little bit. But through the fall, I mean, he had a really good fall swinging the bat. He's put himself in a position, I think, to help us position player-wise. He does a really good job on his jumps and reads in the outfield. So from a defensive outfielding standpoint, he's always going to be in the mix because he's one of our better defenders on the defensive side. So kind of what I was alluding to earlier, we're going to let that stuff play out, but he's put himself in a position to earn opportunities to go out and define himself how much he plays. And with that, though, on the pitching side of it, like I said, we thought he probably would be more of a pitcher than a hitter. As it's turned out, he's contributed more and performed, and not that he hadn't performed on the mound, but he's performed quite well as a position player. So we've kind of taken a little bit of those responsibilities away from him on the mound. So, I would say his contributions are going to be more heavily leaning towards the position player side.
Gareth.
Hey, Tracy, good to see you again. Just my question is, just as far as I know in the schedule, and you guys had talked about maybe adding a 56th game to the season. Would that be against maybe a conference opponent or a non-conference? Just kind of what does that entail as far as when you guys might schedule that?
This is my counterpart, right? This is my colleague in the booth. So no, I mean, I'll tell you, we are going to have a 56th game. I couldn't tell you what it's going to be. Right? I mean, I would assume it's going to be a non-conference in nature, simply because as it stands right now, the conference is playing 3-game weekends, but that would not prohibit us from, depending on how it goes, scheduling a conference opponent as a non-conference game at the conclusion of a conference weekend. I just use conference in a sentence more than anyone ever has in their life right there. But we're just going to have to be flexible, and we're leaving that, here's what you do. You're looking at your schedule, you're looking at the spaces in your schedule. Inevitably, there's probably going to be more gaps in the schedule because of some cancellations. So we're leaving a little bit of flexibility in there to see how to piece that together. But I would anticipate for sure playing, or at least scheduling, that 56th game. And I just don't, it will be a non-conference game. I just don't know whether it will be versus a conference or non-conference opponent.
Gotcha. Appreciate it.
Mark.
Hey, Tracy, good to see you. Appreciate your time today. Appreciate you sharing the story about Pedro. And I think a lot of us have been kind of rocked by that news. I'm just wondering if you might be able to share. Matt Berry had shared a story at SportsCenter, an ASU alum, how he and Pedro kind of went back and forth about the rivalry. What were those conversations between you and Pedro like, since his son went to school down in Tucson? And just the man, I think a lot of us remember him for his kindness. What were your interactions with him like?
It was that was always our go-to. Because the first time I met him, he was actually walking. We're neighbors. Like, it's literally, you could take a driver and I could hit a golf ball to his house and his mine to mine. I met him walking the dog in the neighborhood. It was kind of the first time we had met. And Rio, of course, his son was a pitcher at U of A and was already, going there by the time we arrived. But that was always at the center of our conversations. But he was always funny, because like, man, I'm rooting for you and want you to win, except those games. And in fact, the other night, it was on Saturday, it was getting a little chilly, and my wife and actually Sandy, they were getting chilly, and they were trying to figure out, he was going to get a blanket, but he didn't want to get the blanket for Jamie. That was a U of A blanket, so he brought it out. we were kind of joking around about that. I was like, she ain't gonna use that blanket. Come on. And I think I made some comment like, she doesn't have to use the restroom. Why'd you bring that out? One of those deals. So he was, as you know, as down to earth as they come, and just going to be missed because of the genuine nature of who he was. And his loyalties certainly were with his son, but I could also tell you he was a huge fan of ASU and ASU baseball, and that's what I got for you.
Appreciate it.
Jesse.
Hey, Coach, to just kind of go off of that, first off, how long ago was it when you met him? And then secondly, just do you have a favorite memory of your friendship with Pedro Gomez?
Yeah, I mean, it was right when we got in town. Like I said, he was on a walk. I didn't know that he lived in the neighborhood, and so it was kind of at that time. And then we just eventually spent more time together because convenient, whether he would come and sit out back and drink wine at my place or vice versa. I'll honestly say to you, my favorite memory, and this is why it's still so surreal to me. It's still very raw to me. And I said this to somebody earlier today, so I've known him for 7 years that we've been here, but the conversation and the stuff Saturday night that we were talking about, I didn't know. And Jeff, you could I didn't know that it was the print press that actually brought him to the Phoenix area. And so, we were talking about when he and his wife met and the progression of going across the country and back and all of these things and how he ultimately ended up in this area. And I was thinking about that today. It's like, gosh, I've known him for that long, but I learned about 90% of what I know about him today in those last 3.5 hours that we spent together on Saturday night. So I would say truly my favorite memories outside of him always ribbing, and rubbing it in on occasion of his U of A stuff was last night, just learning about him as a human and then the impact. And as you see that, the comments that you see, the things that people say, that's who he was. And I don't know that the guy, I saw someone said that, I don't know that he had an enemy. I mean, I probably did, but I don't know that he did. He just was a good dude. But my favorite time, truly, and I know it was last Saturday, because we just had not talked at that depth before in our relationship. And the fact that we did it that night and he's gone the next day, I don't know what it means, but I'll never forget that.
Cole.
Hey, Skip. Hope you're doing well. I kind of want to switch gears and talk about the pitching staff. Ben talked a lot about how that's a very deep part of the team. And just from your perspective, how is it shaping out? Who are the guys who are really standing out to you, whether they're returning or they're new guys? And what's sort of an idea? Can you give us an idea, I guess, of what it's going to look like come opening day?
Well, I mean, I think it's, Cooper, Boyd, Thornton, Tolman, Fall. Gosh, I don't have my list in front of me here, but Cam Denny. I mean, we got some really good arms. I mean, as much as we lost from the offensive side last season, I think really the most notable element was Dabovich off the pitching staff, which I thought was one of our strengths as well as we hit. I still thought our pitching was very good last year. And now with the addition of some of the young arms, Ethan Long has made a really strong impression. Brock Peary, you may remember that name from the ASU, he's thrown well. Bodlovich is Bodlovich. So I think we're going to have some depth there. But just as I said on the hitting side and the positional side, we're going to let that stuff play out. But I think that's going to be, when you talk about the strength of our team or really competitive to get on that dirt or on that mound, that's going to be tough to get out there because we've got strike throwers, but we also have strike throwers with good stuff. And if you're not in the zone, you're probably not going to be pitching. And, you know, we've got, I think, 19 or 20 pitchers on the staff roster because of some of the COVID stuff or whatever. But you only use usually 8 to 10 through a season. So, you know, it's going to be really, really competitive to the pitching. So, but I'm excited about that. I mean, I think that's good. We're probably as good a shape on the mound as we've been since we've been here.
Jack.
Coach Kelly, sir, what did you say, Jeff or Jack?
Jack Loader.
All right, cool. Coach Kelly mentioned in the fall that the back end of the bullpen was likely to be a kind of a committee. Is that still generally the plan?
Well, it's funny because you've got, you know, yeah, we're going to let it play out. I mean, you got a Justin Fall that's, you know, mid-90s, flash some uppers. You got Ethan Long, a freshman who you guys haven't seen yet, the same thing, could be a mid-90s guy. And you got a Cam Denny who may not have the mid-90s fastball, but has, you know, low 90s closer stuff. And it's just nice to have those options at the back end. But Justin Fall's not pitched in that role for us yet when it mattered. So we need to see that if he can do that. I mean, he can stuff-wise. Ethan Long has not pitched one inning in college yet, so we don't really know, you know, how he's going to respond. Cam Denny didn't pitch that role for us last year, but pitched some high leverage innings. So we were just commenting, like, isn't it nice to have the luxury, as you're trying to groom some of those guys for the quote unquote closer role, that you've got dependable guys that you can throw back there as the other guys gain experience and learn. So I can't sit here today and tell you, are we going to be a closer by, you know, committee, or are we going to have an actual closer? But what I can tell you is we do have the ability and roster to do both, but we want to kind of let that stuff play out. We have ideas of where guys are going to be slotted going in. But, you know, I've always been about, it isn't about what I think. It's not about, you know, what I think a guy will do. It's about what they actually do. So we say they're going to make the lineup. We aren't. So we're going to let our closer reveal themselves. And practice is one thing, but I think we got to wait to the season until we figure it out, because that pressure's different. So we'll see. But those would be the guys that I think would be vying for that, the names that I just mentioned.
Alex.
For Eric Tolman, was it difficult for him to kind of put hitting aside and really focus on his pitching? And what have you seen from his progression since, I know in the fall his velocity looked a lot higher than it did in the previous spring, and has that continued?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a proponent, as you guys know. I mean, I'm a proponent of two-way guys. I think if you've got a two-way guy that can really do it, it's just an asset. It's a weapon. It's like it's two players for one. The downside of that sometimes, and particularly with the younger they are in their career, is it usually sometimes has a tendency to take away from something else. And in this case with Eric, and you referenced his velocity, I would agree with you. Like, his velocity was not what it could be, and maybe should be. You could argue should be, because we were asking a lot of him on the position player side last year. So we knew with his progression on the mound that he was going to be a dude for us the next year. And therefore, we had talked about limiting that role. Let's take a look at it and see, when you're focusing only on pitching, what it can be. And that's what we've kind of done up to this point. But he's still at the ready that if we need to throw a glove and play some defense at first base, he'd be more than ready to do that. We haven't given him a lot of offensive responsibilities because we knew he was going to be one of the guys at the top of our rotation. So I think in this case, us doing the pitcher stuff only with him has really helped his performance, and then therefore helped the team, because he's pitching at a very high level right now, I think.
Ethan.
Yeah, Coach, going back a little bit to the portion where you talked about COVID kind of affecting team gatherings and stuff, without those team gatherings and having them over Zoom, have you seen the players act any differently because of it?
Not really. I mean, I think we're all dealing with, I think you're keeping a keen eye on the mental state of people. I mean, we're all human beings. We're all wired to be, social by nature. And so when you take a little bit of that ability away, it changes what we're used to. But no, I mean, this team is still, it's close, but the thing that brings you the closest is when you start competition, is when you're all wearing the same uniform, playing a team in the other dugout wearing a different uniform. We just haven't done that yet. So I've been looking forward to that dynamic, even that's going to be the team bonding piece that we've been missing up to this point. So, it is what it is right now. These unique times, these are different. You roll with it and you adapt and you figure it out and you try to do the best you can with that. And so our team unity times, our practice, it's being outside, but being in that area together, although socially distanced. But yeah, it's not team function and sitting and bonding like that. We just can't do it right now. But I think some of that stuff's going to take care of itself when we start the games.
We're going to take 4 more questions. Alexander.
Coach, thanks for doing this. Aubrey Major obviously played high school baseball in Indianapolis and started his collegiate career at Xavier. How much did him coming to ASU play into what was the reason for that, especially with 2 Hoosiers on the coaching staff and yourself and Coach Early?
Well, do you know the random, even more random Aubrey Major fact and connection to Coach Smith? Do you know that one?
Trying to think if there's something Miami related there, but no.
No. So his mother and my sister were high school classmates. And if we always call it, I always joke around God's country, but up there at South Newton High School, the small towns in Indiana. But, that's just the interesting fact specific to him and why he was here. And again, I didn't know this until Xavier had come, and what was that, 2 years ago? 2 years ago had played here. And occasionally, like, you'll play a team and, you're playing against that team, but you'll look out on the field or a guy will do something over the weekend. You're like, God, I'd take that guy. And I remember, it was funny. I remember when we played them, he made a couple unbelievable catches and stuck in some hits, but I remember saying, God, I would take that guy on my team. And then, the COVID and transfer legislation, all that stuff happened. And then, I don't want to say the family connection, it gave us something to talk about, let's put it that way. But I thought that was kind of cool. But that's kind of how it all got started, was just his performance, certainly. And then with COVID and some of the roster stuff, you saw a lot of players moving around the country, but we felt like we got some of the best transfers available, and him being one of them.
Tim.
Hey, Skip, long time no see. Joe says hi, by the way.
I saw your name up there. I was like, please tell me you're on here somewhere.
Yeah, I am. Don't care to show the video right now, but you were talking a little bit ago about how the closer's role is going to kind of play itself out. I wanted to go to the front end of the rotation. Obviously, a great Friday night starter can be a tone setter for a college baseball team, and it looks to me like you've got 4 guys that could easily be a Friday night starter. Do you have an idea right now who will be your guy? And maybe if you could go over those fellows, what qualities they have or what qualities you look for in a Friday night guy.
Yeah, I would say, and you're right. I mean, we say 4, but it honestly, you could, if you throw in a couple other names of guys that I think eventually would be starters here, if we were forced to do it, we would probably have, in my opinion, maybe not Friday night caliber guys, but we would have, a handful of legitimate, Pac-12 weekend guys. But specific to your question on Friday night, I think the guy that has pitched himself and has separated himself just from the time we've come back, and even based on a little bit of what he did last year, is Cooper Benson. If we're starting right now, we're running him out there on Friday. Tolman's has really made a jump on the mound and could certainly do that, but he's going to be a weekend guy for us. And then Boyd, the way he pitched last season, the finishing up, and then the maturity, the experience of being a weekend guy in this conference already. And then with Thornton, although a limited season last year, coming off, I think, what was the National Freshman of the Year, Freshman Pitcher of the Year. And you're talking about those 4 names, but unfortunately there's only 3 games in the weekend. if one of those guys are not starting, that gives you an indication like the pitching's pretty deep here. But if you're pinning me down on the Friday guy and the qualities, I would say Benson right now. His stuff is good. He's made a jump on the velocity side of it, but I love his mentality, the swing and misses. And my impression of Coop is like, if he's not going to give it to you, you're going to have to beat him. He's a very competitive, as you said. I think he's a great personality to set the tone for the weekend, because he's going to come at you and he's going to make you beat him. And you want other guys to feed off of that.
Jeff Metcalf.
Just to ask you just one or two more things on Pedro. When you guys talked baseball, do you remember any like baseball specific conversations that you guys might have had? And what do you think it was that made him so good at his job? Was it, his just, being bilingual, coming from Cuba, his love for the game, and then his people skills? What do you think it was that stood out that made him so good at his job?
It's all of the above. I mean, it's funny you said it, because when you were asking that question, in my mind, I was like, he's one of the best people you'll ever meet. We were talking baseball the other night. We were talking about some of the managers and things in the big leagues and why they're good. And he knew everybody. I mean, he knew everybody. And I think that's what made him so special, is he would take the pieces of everybody, and, and he always saw the good in people. And we were talking about, the things that Dusty Baker does as a manager and why he's so good relating to his players. And, you brought up the bilingual thing. We talked about that and the fact of, where he came from and being able to use that as an asset for his job. But all the above. I mean, we did. We literally just sat and talked all about that stuff on Saturday, and how, and I didn't know the whole piece about him coming here and writing, and that was, and I think, and you probably know that, like, if I recall, he said it was when the Diamondbacks were just starting their franchise. That was kind of the reason he was brought out here, was to cover the start of that. And then how that evolved into his, certainly, career with ESPN. But if he just to me, he's respectful. He was humble. He could make fun of himself. And if he didn't make fun of himself, I made fun of him. He could always laugh at himself, but he was very knowledgeable. I think one of the most intelligent, not just baseball people we've ever been around, but a very, very intelligent person. He could talk about a wide variety of subjects. And that's the part that, just it just sucks that someone like that is not here anymore. And you could say it's more normal or natural. If he's, 70 some years old, that's still a tough pill to swallow. But man, when, it's so short, and he's 58, it just doesn't seem fair. And because I think not only was he already established and already doing unbelievable things in his profession, I still think he had a lot more to offer. And where I say a lot more to offer is just like some of the younger faces that I'm seeing on this Zoom media day, is that you take people like that, guys like you, that the younger profession, the young professionals can learn from that. And I think I think we got robbed. I think we got on a lot of levels. Sandy and the kids got robbed of a unbelievable, father and husband and role model, all of those things. But I think you guys got robbed in the profession because you lost a giant and somebody that had grinded all the way through. And if you could map a career out and the highs and lows, that there probably wouldn't be too many that wouldn't say, you know what, I'd kind of take that path if I knew that's where I was going to, that I would end up doing what he did. And it just sucks. I mean, that's the word. It sucks.
Last question, Jacob.
Tracy, during the fall, you guys had mentioned that Brian Calmer had made significant improvements with the power and just the way that he was going about his business. Where do you see him kind of fitting into the lineup right now? And has he kind of continued that maturation over the last several months to where you're at?
He's working. I would say, honestly, some guys have probably passed him in the performance piece. And, you know, and I think one of the attributes that, you know, I think Brian's contribution, or at least immediate contribution, was on the offensive side. And, you know, it'd been a little bit of a struggle for him. And we say this all the time in our program, and this is in any program I've ever coached, is sometimes, excuse me, it's not what you're not doing, it's just that others are doing it a little bit better. And I would say, just based on how we played, where we've come since the fall, some of those young guys that maybe weren't in the conversation as much in the fall because they're still trying to find their way, have, you know, made some improvements, some adjustments that have played out and shown up, you know, early spring. And whereas, you know, maybe, you know, in Brian's case, you know, maybe it's put a little bit more competition, or maybe some more roadblocks in his path to playing and being an everyday guy. But that said, all of that stuff is, it's not the season. You know, I always say, you know, it matters when the lights are on. So roundabout, you know, answer to your question, I would say, you know, we were a little disappointed in the progression, but we know it's in there. It's just a matter of getting that out. But I'd say he's going to have to wait his turn for some opportunities based on what other guys did.